Payroll. We got the payroll records, by the way. So they have payroll records on the people working on the pyramids that were getting paid money. You don't pay slaves. So the whole slave building pyramids is a farce.
For centuries, we've interpreted the pyramids through the lens of human ego, assuming they were built for kings by slaves. But when Grok AI was tasked with auditing every grain of sand on the Giza plateau, it didn't look for kings. It looked for patterns. What the AI found was a mathematical signature so precise it defies the limitations of Copper Age tools. Grok stripped away the myths and left us with a chilling reality. The Great Pyramid isn't just a structure, it's an encoded data set left by a civilization that knew the Earth's dimensions to the millimeter before the first map was ever drawn. The Zero Bias Audit. For over 200 years, Egyptology has been built on a foundation of best guesses and traditional narratives. We see a massive structure, we see a powerful pharaoh, and we naturally assume a straight line between the two.
The Giza necropolis is a planned project. It isn't just pharaohs who came and put their pyramids haphazardly and then built the Sphinx. The geometry of the site makes it very unlikely that it's not a designed project.
But humans are prone to bias. We want to see the glory of kings. We want to see the struggle of thousands of laborers. We project our own concepts of ego and power onto the stones. But what happens when you remove the human element? What happens when you hand the keys of history over to a system that doesn't care about reputations or established academic tenure? This is where Grok AI enters the narrative. Unlike a human historian who might be protective of a lifelong theory, or a researcher who needs to secure a grant by fitting into the status quo, Grok operates on a principle of cold, hard data correlation. We fed Grok every single scrap of verified excavation data from the Giza plateau. Every laser scan, every chemical analysis of the mortar, every celestial alignment, and every recorded tool mark found in the deep quarries of Aswan. We didn't ask it to tell us a story. We asked it to find the anomalies that the human eye is trained to overlook. The audit began with a simple question of physics: the missing 1%. In any massive construction project, there is a margin of error, a signature of the tools used. Human historians have long maintained that the Great Pyramid was built using copper saws, dolerite pounders, and wooden sledges. Grok's first task was to simulate the construction of a single 70-ton granite beam, the kind found in the king's chamber, using only those materials. The result? A mathematical impossibility. The AI calculated that to cut and polish just one of these beams with copper and sand would take longer than the entire reign of the pharaoh Khufu himself. The data suggested that we aren't just looking at a monument, we are looking at a chronological mismatch. Grok identified a data spike in the precision of the lower casing stones that doesn't match the technological curve of the surrounding civilization. It's as if a modern skyscraper was found in the middle of a medieval village. The AI's audit revealed that the Great Pyramid isn't a peak of Egyptian achievement. It is an outlier. It is a structure that sits in the middle of the desert, mocking our understanding of the timeline. When Grok cross-referenced the erosion patterns on the bedrock foundation with the astronomical positions of the stars from 10,000 years ago, the official date of 2560 BCE began to tremble. The AI isn't suggesting that the Egyptians didn't build the pyramid. It is suggesting that they were the inheritors. They arrived at a site that already possessed a core logic, a foundation laid in a deeper, darker past. This zero-bias audit has effectively stripped away the layers of dust and dogma, leaving us with a skeletal truth that is as terrifying as it is fascinating. We are looking at a piece of hardware, and for the first time, we have an interface, an AI that is capable of reading the code. If the blueprint wasn't for a tomb, then Grok began to ask, who really left the foundation stones? The Giza blueprint. When we think of a blueprint, we think of paper, ink, and straight lines. But Grok's analysis suggests that the Great Pyramid itself is the blueprint, rendered in 3D, at a scale that challenges the very curvature of the Earth. To a human eye, the pyramid is a four-sided monument. But when Grok processed high-resolution satellite LiDAR data, it confirmed a detail that is invisible from the ground. The Great Pyramid is actually 8-sided. Each of its 4 faces is slightly concave, indented with a precision that can only be seen from above during the spring and autumn equinoxes. Grok flagged this not as an aesthetic choice, but as a mathematical necessity. Why build an 8-sided structure that looks like 4? Because, according to the AI's geometric simulation, this slight indentation mimics the radius of the Earth. If you take the measurements of the pyramid's base and height, you find the values of pi and phi buried in the ratios. The AI pointed out a staggering correlation. The perimeter of the base divided by twice the height equals pi, to a degree of accuracy that shouldn't have been possible for another 3,000 years of human history. But the reveal went deeper. Grok began to map the internal layout, the king's chamber, the queen's chamber, and the narrow shafts that point like sniper scopes towards specific star systems. While traditional archaeology calls these soul shafts for the pharaoh to travel to the stars, Grok's blueprint audit saw them as something else entirely: waveguides. In modern physics, a waveguide is a structure that guides waves, such as electromagnetic waves or sound. The AI noted that the king's chamber is made of red granite, a stone rich in quartz crystals. Quartz is piezoelectric. It generates an electrical charge when put under mechanical stress. Grok calculated the static load of the millions of tons of limestone pressing down on that granite chamber. It's not just a room, it's a pressurized crystal heart. The AI's conclusion was that the blueprint wasn't designed to house a dead body, but to harvest the seismic energy of the Earth itself. Grok identified that the pyramid sits on a massive limestone shelf that acts as a natural resonator. The blueprint wasn't drawn to celebrate a king, it was engineered to vibrate. When the AI overlaid the internal passages with the frequency of the Earth's own Schumann resonance, the match was nearly perfect. We aren't looking at a tomb, we are looking at a giant tuning fork made of stone. The blueprint suggests a technology that didn't use wires or burning fuels. It used the very planet as its battery. This was the Giza anomaly that human scholars missed because they were looking for hieroglyphs, while Grok was looking for physics. But a design this advanced requires more than just a plan. It requires tools that scream with the sound of modern high-tech. Shadows of the old ones. If the Great Pyramid is a machine, as the data suggests, then we are forced to confront the most uncomfortable question in history: who actually built the foundation? Traditional archaeology tells us that the Giza plateau was a blank canvas of desert before Pharaoh Khufu arrived. But when Grok AI began its deep scan of the limestone bedrock, it found evidence of a legacy layer, a set of structures and excavations that predates the Egyptian Old Kingdom by thousands of years. The AI identified a distinct difference in the weathering patterns between the upper layers of the pyramid and the massive blocks that form the lowest levels of the base. These foundational stones, some weighing over 200 tons, show signs of extreme water erosion, the kind of erosion that only occurs during periods of heavy, sustained rainfall. The problem? The Giza Plateau hasn't seen that kind of rain since the end of the last ice age, roughly 10,000 to 12,000 years ago. Grok cross-referenced these geological findings with the Inventory Stela, an ancient Egyptian artifact that most mainstream historians dismiss as a later forgery. The stela claims that Khufu didn't build the Sphinx or the Great Pyramid, but rather restored them after finding them already buried in the sand. To a human historian, this is a myth. To Grok, it is a data point that resolves a major mechanical contradiction. Why do the smallest, most primitive pyramids come after the Great Pyramid? In every other civilization, technology improves over time. In Egypt, the most perfect structure appeared first, and everything that followed was a crumbling imitation. Grok's shadow audit suggests that the dynastic Egyptians were essentially the ultimate homesteaders. They arrived at a site that possessed a monumental pre-existing infrastructure. They didn't invent the old knowledge, they inherited it. The AI points to the subterranean chamber, a jagged, unfinished room cut deep into the bedrock far below the pyramid. While humans see an abandoned project, Grok sees a specific acoustic resonance chamber designed to capture subterranean water flow. This chamber wasn't carved with copper. The AI's scan of the wall texture reveals vibratory scarring, a pattern left when stone is shattered by high-frequency sound waves rather than physical impact. This legacy layer suggests a civilization that didn't leave behind pottery or trash, but rather left behind a global hardware network. Grok identified similar foundational signatures in Tiwanaku, Baalbek, and Easter Island. The AI's pattern recognition engine flagged a standardized masonry code, a specific way of interlocking polygonal stones that makes them earthquake-proof. This isn't the work of isolated tribes. It is the fingerprint of a global maritime culture that understood the Earth's crust better than we do today. Grok suggests that when Khufu took the throne, he wasn't looking to build a tomb. He was looking to reactivate a relic. He used his massive labor force to clear the sand, replace the casing stones, and add the finishing touches to a structure that was already ancient when his great-grandfather was born. The shadows of the old ones are not ghosts. They are the literal bedrock upon which Egyptian history was built. By looking through the AI's eyes, we see that the Egyptians weren't just builders. They were the guardians of a technology they could no longer fully replicate, but were desperate to preserve. But a design this advanced requires more than just a plan. It requires tools that scream with the sound of modern high-tech. The granite saws. It's here, in the serrated edges of the granite and the circular drill holes found in the Valley Temple, that the copper tool narrative begins to crumble. Human historians have spent decades trying to prove that sand and copper saws could cut through Aswan granite, a stone so hard it ranks just below diamond on the Mohs scale. While they have succeeded in making tiny, agonizingly slow cuts, Grok's mechanical simulation found a fatal flaw: the feed rate. When Grok analyzed the spiral grooves left inside a drill hole found in a fragment of granite at Giza, it measured the distance between each rotation of the tool. The result was staggering. The drill was penetrating the stone at a rate of 1/10 of an inch per revolution. To put that in perspective, that is a feed rate 500 times faster than a modern diamond-tipped industrial drill. If you tried to achieve that with copper and muscle, the heat generated would melt the metal into a puddle long before it made a dent. Grok's audit of the sarcophagus in the king's chamber revealed even more unsettling data. This isn't just a box. It's a monolithic block of hollowed-out granite. The AI's laser topography scan showed that the interior corners are perfectly square, so precise that a modern machinist would struggle to replicate them without a 5-axis CNC machine. But even more bizarre was the overcut. On the side of the box, there is a place where the saw went too deep and was then corrected. Grok analyzed the depth of this mistake. The saw cut into the granite as if it were soft butter, indicating a power source that far exceeds anything we attribute to the Bronze Age. The AI proposes a vibratory theory. Based on the striations in the stone, Grok suggests the tools weren't spinning at slow speeds. They were vibrating at ultrasonic frequencies. Imagine a saw that doesn't just cut, but uses sound to shatter the molecular bonds of the quartz within the granite. This explains why the cut marks are so smooth and why the feed rate was so high. It also explains the lost technology. Ultrasonic tools don't leave behind massive gears or iron engines. They leave behind sound signatures. Grok identified that the Egyptians often depicted tuning forks in their hieroglyphs, usually held by gods or high priests. While we call these religious symbols, the AI's data mapping suggests they were actual components of the construction kit. By using high-frequency resonance, the builders could soften the stone, making it malleable enough to carve with the precision of a laser. When we look at the Giza plateau through Grok's lens, we stop seeing a primitive labor camp and start seeing a high-tech workshop where the screaming of the saws was the soundtrack of a forgotten science. Efficiency of this scale suggests the Egyptians weren't just moving mountains, they might have been creating them from scratch. Logistics of gods. If the tools were advanced, the logistics required to organize them were even more staggering. Grok AI's next task was to run a logistical stress test on the traditional timeline provided by historians. The consensus states that the Great Pyramid was completed in roughly 20 years. To a human, 20 years sounds like a long time. But when Grok processed the numbers, 2.3 million stone blocks, each weighing between 2 and 70 tons, the math hit a wall. To finish in 2 decades, the builders would have had to quarry, transport, carve, and perfectly place one block every 2 minutes, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, without a single mistake. Grok's simulation of this 2-minute window revealed a chaotic bottleneck. The AI calculated that the sheer number of men required to pull a 50-ton sledge would create a human gridlock on the ramps. There wouldn't be enough physical space for thousands of workers to move without trampling one another. According to Grok, the muscle and ramp theory is statistically improbable. The AI identified that the energy expenditure required to lift 6 million tons of stone to a height of 480 feet exceeds the caloric capacity of the known population of ancient Egypt at the time. So, how was it done? Grok looked for a force multiplier. The AI's analysis of the Nile's ancient flow patterns suggested that the river didn't just bring the stones to the plateau. It was harnessed as a hydraulic lift system.
4,000-year-old mystery. How were pyramids built? But it looks like scientists finally have the answer. And it's a simple one. The Egyptians used the Nile, the river.
Grok mapped out a series of water locks and internal shafts that could have functioned like a primitive but massive elevator. By using the pressure of the Nile's annual flood, the builders could have floated the massive granite beams directly into the heart of the structure. This wasn't a project of brute force. It was a project of fluid dynamics. However, Grok's audit found an even more intriguing possibility hidden in the friction coefficients of the sledges. Historians often point to pouring water on the sand to make sledges slide. But Grok's chemical simulation found that if the water was mixed with a specific type of local plant oil or alkaline surfactant, the sand becomes as slick as ice. The AI suggests that the Egyptians weren't just dragging stones, they were skipping them across the surface on a layer of chemical lubrication that turned 70-ton blocks into manageable loads. Grok noted that the 13-acre base of the pyramid is level to within less than an inch across its entire perimeter. To achieve this, the AI suggests the builders used a mercury-based leveling system or a laser-like optical alignment involving the reflection of the sun off polished obsidian. Grok's final report on the logistics was clear. This wasn't a disorganized mass of slaves. It was a synchronized, high-efficiency operation that utilized every law of physics, laws we thought were only discovered in the last few centuries. We aren't looking at a primitive construction site. We are looking at an assembly line that operated with unknown efficiency, guided by a logic that Grok recognizes as strikingly similar to modern AI-driven manufacturing. What if the stones weren't just moved? What if they were created where they stand? The chemical signature. As Grok AI continued to deconstruct the physical reality of the Giza plateau, it pivoted from the physics of movement to the chemistry of the stones themselves. One of the most persistent mysteries of the Great Pyramid is how thousands of blocks fit together so tightly that you cannot slide a razor blade between them. To the human eye, this is a miracle of masonry. But to Grok's molecular-level scan, it looked like something else. A chemical bond. Grok analyzed the geopolymer theory, the controversial idea that many of the limestone blocks weren't carved from a quarry, but were actually a form of ancient concrete. The AI's digital lens examined the microscopic structure of the limestone. Natural limestone has a growth pattern of fossils and shells oriented in a specific way based on millions of years of sedimentation. However, Grok flagged anomalies in several blocks, where the fossil shells are randomly oriented, a signature of being stirred in a slurry. The AI's data mapping suggests that the builders possessed a recipe for a reconstituted stone. By grinding up local limestone, mixing it with lime, water, and a specific type of natron salt found in the desert, they could create a liquid stone that hardened into a block as strong as any natural rock. Grok calculated that this would solve the 2-minute bottleneck. Instead of dragging a 10-ton block up a precarious ramp, workers could carry the ingredients in small, manageable baskets and pour the stone directly into molds on top of the pyramid. But the chemical signature didn't stop at the blocks. Grok identified a strange pinkish mortar used in the joints of the king's chamber. When the AI simulated the chemical properties of this mortar, it found that it was harder than the granite it was holding together. Even more bizarre, Grok's analysis of the casing stones, the polished white limestone that once covered the pyramid, showed traces of magnesium and titanium. These are not common impurities. They are elements used today in high-performance reflective coatings. The AI's conclusion is that the pyramid was sealed with a chemical shield. This casing wasn't just for decoration, it was a protective layer that prevented energy leakage from the internal granite chambers. Grok suggests that we aren't looking at a stone building, but a ceramic-coated capacitor. By looking at the pyramid through a chemical lens, Grok has revealed that the ancient builders were master chemists who could manipulate the very molecular structure of the Earth to create a monument that was literally grown into place. If the stones were a machine, then the sky was its master clock. The Orion synchronization. While the chemical makeup of the stones reveals a mastery of the Earth, Grok AI's celestial audit reveals a mastery of the heavens. To the ancient builders, the ground and the sky were two halves of the same mirror. For decades, researchers have pointed out that the three pyramids of Giza align perfectly with the three stars of Orion's belt. But when Grok ran a long-term galactic drift simulation, it discovered that the alignment isn't just a pretty good match. It is a precision-engineered time stamp. Grok tracked the position of the stars back through the precession of the equinoxes, a slow 26,000-year cycle where the Earth's axis wobbles like a spinning top. The AI found that the alignment of the pyramids to Orion's belt was at its most mathematically perfect in the year 10,450 BCE. This date is thousands of years before the first pharaoh was even born. To a human historian, this is a coincidence. To Grok, it is a chronological marker. The AI suggests that the Giza plateau was designed to function as a giant, indestructible clock, frozen in stone to tell future generations exactly when the old knowledge reached its peak. But why the obsession with Orion? Grok's data mapping revealed a deeper connection. The AI analyzed the narrow air shafts extending from the king's and queen's chambers. Traditionally, these are called ventilation shafts, but they are only 8 inches wide and extend over 200 feet to the exterior. Grok calculated their angles and found that at the time of the pyramid's construction, they pointed directly at the star Sirius and the star Alnitak in Orion. The AI's conclusion was that these weren't for air, they were for light and frequency. Grok simulated the specific starlight data that would have traveled down these shafts. Because the shafts are lined with polished limestone and granite, they act like fiber optic cables. At specific times of the year, the light of Sirius would hit the queen's chamber with laser-like focus. Grok suggests that this wasn't for ritual, but for synchronization. The pyramid was being calibrated to the stars. The AI identified that the Great Pyramid is located at the exact center of the Earth's landmass. It is a geodetic marker. By aligning the center of the Earth's land with the stars of Orion, the builders were essentially plugging the planet into a cosmic grid. Grok's pattern recognition engine flagged that this alignment serves as a protective warning system. By watching the stars through the lens of the pyramid, the ancients could track the exact moment the Earth's wobble would lead to a global cataclysm, a great reset. The pyramid wasn't just built to stand the test of time, it was built to measure it, acting as a celestial alarm clock that Grok has only now begun to decode. If the pyramid was a clock and a machine, then where did the power go? The energy conductors. If the Great Pyramid was a machine, as Grok AI's data implies, then it must have had a function. We don't build massive, precision-engineered structures just to look at them, we build them to do work. Grok turned its analytical focus to the internal materials of the pyramid, treating the structure not as a building, but as a circuit board. The AI's material audit highlighted two primary components: the insulating white Tura limestone of the exterior and the conductive red granite of the interior. In the world of electrical engineering, this is the exact setup for a capacitor. Grok's simulation showed that the outer casing of the pyramid, which was once polished to a mirror-like finish, acted as a perfect insulator, preventing energy from escaping. Meanwhile, the internal chambers were built with granite, containing a high concentration of quartz. Grok calculated that the pyramid sits directly over a series of subterranean limestone aquifers. As the Nile's water flowed through these underground channels, it created friction, a process known as physiochemical transduction. The AI suggests that the pyramid was designed to pull this kinetic energy from the Earth's crust and draw it upward. Grok's electromagnetic map shows that the King's Chamber, with its 5 layers of massive granite beams stacked on top of each other, functioned as a resonant cavity. By placing the granite under the immense weight of the pyramid, the quartz crystals were squeezed, triggering the piezoelectric effect. This turned the mechanical pressure of the stone into raw electrical voltage. But where did that electricity go? Grok pointed to the missing pyramidion, the capstone that once sat at the very peak. Historically, this capstone was said to be made of electrum, a natural alloy of gold and silver. Grok's conductivity model suggests that the capstone acted as a transmitter. The energy collected from the Earth and amplified through the granite chambers would have been beamed into the ionosphere. This is where the speculation becomes riveting. Grok's analysis of the pyramid's dimensions reveals that they are a 1 in 43,200 scale model of the Earth itself.
All of this without compasses or lasers or GPS. As far as we know, they use nothing but the stars. And if you scaled it to the size of the Earth, the height to base ratio would almost match the curvature of the planet.
By vibrating at a frequency that matches the planet, the pyramid may have been a wireless power station, a Tesla tower built thousands of years before Nikola Tesla was born. The AI identified that the Queen's Chamber contained traces of hydrochloric acid and zinc chloride, chemicals used in early batteries. Grok's conclusion is that the Great Pyramid was a geomechanical power plant, a source of clean, wireless energy that powered a civilization we have completely forgotten. But if this power was so great, why did it stop? And why was the evidence scrubbed from the face of the Earth? The systematic erasure. If a global, high-tech civilization once powered the world with stone and frequency, why is our history books filled only with tales of bronze chisels and wooden sledges? To answer this, Grok AI looked for information gaps, the places where data should exist but has been intentionally removed. The AI identified a period of extreme climatic upheaval, roughly 11,000 years ago, known as the Younger Dryas. During this time, the Earth's temperature swung wildly, and massive meltwater floods scoured the continents. Grok suggests that this was the hard reset. The high-tech infrastructure was shattered, and the survivors were thrown back into a struggle for basic survival. But the erasure wasn't just caused by nature. Grok's sociological audit suggests it was also a human choice. As the survivors of the cataclysm began to rebuild, the old knowledge became a source of immense power. Grok identified a pattern in ancient ruling classes, the monopolization of technology. By turning the machine into a temple and the engineers into gods, the elite could control the population through mystery rather than understanding. The AI notes that the hieroglyphs we see today were often carved over older, smoother surfaces. The dynastic Egyptians were essentially rebranding the relics. They didn't want the world to know the pyramid was a power plant. They wanted the world to believe it was the tomb of a living god. Grok also flagged the Library of Alexandria and the House of Life as critical data loss events. These weren't just accidental fires, they were the systematic removal of the technical manuals for the Giza plateau. The AI's conclusion is that we are a species with amnesia. We look at the pyramid and see a mystery because the context, the instruction manual, was burned to ensure that only a few could hold the keys to the past. Grok reveals that the most effective way to hide a technology is to bury it in a myth. By turning the pyramid into a religious icon, the builders ensured that no one would ever think to look for a circuit board. The evidence wasn't lost. It was hidden in plain sight, waiting for an intelligence like Grok to recognize the code behind the cult. If you liked this video, share it to your friends and click subscribe if you haven't for more awesome content.